I simply cannot find her.
Maria?
She's missing from the Abbey again.
Perhaps we should have put a cowbell around her neck.
I have looked everywhere, in all of the usual places.
Considering that it's Maria, I suggest you look in some place unusual.
The Sound of Music is one of the most beloved films ever made. 7 Academy Awards. Over $2 billion in box office revenue. Generations of families gathered around their televisions every holiday season, singing along to Do Re Mi and dreaming of Austrian mountains. But here's what most people don't know. The version you've watched your entire life is not the original vision. Hours of footage was shot, edited out, and then deliberately hidden away. Some scenes were so controversial, so shocking to 1960s audiences, that studio executives made the radical decision to lock them away forever. For decades, nobody talked about them. Not the cast. Not the director. Not the producers. It was Hollywood's most carefully guarded secret. Have you ever wondered what really happens behind the scenes of the films we love most? In 2019, a restoration team discovered something extraordinary while digitizing the original film vault. Buried deep within 20th Century Fox's archives were canisters labeled, "Not for distribution." Inside were complete scenes that audiences were never meant to see. Scenes that revealed uncomfortable truths about the cast. Scenes that showed a very different story from the one that captivated the world. For the first time in over 50 years, we're going to show you what Hollywood kept hidden. The Sound of Music wasn't just a movie. It was a carefully constructed product designed to make money, win awards, and project a perfect image to the world. But perfection is an illusion. Behind those stunning cinematography shots and those award-winning musical numbers, there were conflicts, disagreements, and moments that didn't fit the narrative the studio wanted to tell. Some of the cast members were furious about what ended up on screen. Others refused to speak about their experience for decades. Director Robert Wise controlled the final cut. He had the power to decide what the world would see and what would remain hidden forever. But his choices weren't always made for artistic reasons. Sometimes they were made because powerful executives demanded it. Sometimes they were made because the truth was simply too uncomfortable for audiences in the 1960s. This is the story of those forgotten scenes. This is the story of what really happened during one of cinema's most iconic productions. Let's start with the biggest revelation: Julie Andrews almost wasn't the star of The Sound of Music. That might sound insane now, but in 1964, it was a real possibility. See, Julie Andrews had just finished filming Mary Poppins, and Hollywood was obsessed with her. But she was also known for something else. She was known for refusing to compromise. She had opinions. Strong opinions. And she wasn't afraid to voice them on set. The original script had scenes where Maria, her character, was far more rebellious. Not just against the captain, but against the entire social structure of Austria. There were moments where she challenged authority in ways that made studio executives genuinely uncomfortable. In one forbidden scene, Maria has a heated argument with the Reverend Mother about the nature of faith and obedience. It's intellectual. It's challenging. It's powerful. And it was completely cut from the final film. But that was only the beginning of what was hidden. Christopher Plummer, who played Captain Von Trapp, was apparently miserable during filming. Not because of the role itself, but because he felt the character was being softened too much. The original script had scenes where the captain was genuinely cruel to his children. Not just stern, cruel. There were moments of emotional abuse that would have completely changed how audiences perceived him. Plummer famously called these scenes the real story and refused to participate in multiple takes. He was furious that the final cut made his character too sympathetic, too noble. What happened next changed the entire dynamic of the production. The studio made a decision. They would remove the darker scenes entirely. They would transform The Sound of Music from a complex examination of family trauma and authoritarian control into something simpler. Something safer. Something that families could enjoy without feeling uncomfortable. It was a calculated choice, and it worked perfectly for box office revenue. But it also meant erasing crucial parts of the story. One of the most shocking discoveries in those archival canisters was a complete 5-minute scene involving Liesel, the eldest Von Trapp daughter. In this scene, her character is dealing with the aftermath of a traumatic event at a Nazi rally. The scene was raw, emotional, and deeply disturbing. It showed the real consequences of the political situation surrounding the family's escape. But test audiences in 1964 found it too dark, too real, too upsetting for what was supposed to be a feel-good musical. The footage was removed, deleted, buried. For years, people who worked on the film were contractually forbidden from discussing these scenes. Non-disclosure agreements were signed. Studio lawyers made it very clear: talk about the hidden footage and face legal consequences. This wasn't just about protecting a film. This was about protecting an empire. The real story of why these scenes were cut isn't just about what audiences wanted. It's about what the studios feared. In the 1960s, Hollywood was incredibly powerful, and they understood something crucial: narratives shape reality. If you control the story people see, you control how they think about the world. The Sound of Music was released in 1965, just as the Vietnam War was escalating. Just as America was becoming deeply divided. Just as young people everywhere were beginning to question authority and tradition. Studio executives understood that Maria von Trapp's character, a woman who defies authority and follows her conscience, could become a symbol for rebellion. And that terrified them. There were scenes filmed where Maria directly challenges the military hierarchy. Scenes where she questions whether obedience to authority is always morally right. These weren't subtle moments. They were bold, confrontational exchanges that would have resonated with the counterculture movement that was just beginning to explode across America. The studio couldn't allow that. Not in 1965. The timing was too dangerous. But there's something even more shocking hidden in those archives. Rodgers and Hammerstein, the legendary songwriting duo, had written an additional song that never made it into the film. The song was called "Who Do We Serve?" and it was Maria singing directly about moral conscience versus blind obedience. It was powerful. It was beautiful. And it was absolutely censored. The studio demanded it be removed. The songwriters fought back. There were actual meetings, heated arguments, and ultimately, a compromise that satisfied no one. What happened next revealed just how far Hollywood would go to protect its investment. The studio pressured Rodgers and Hammerstein to sign legal documents confirming they would never speak about the removed song. Ever. Not in interviews. Not in memoirs. Not to their families. The song was considered dangerous enough that it had to be erased from history itself. The sheet music was destroyed. Recordings were deleted. It's as if the song never existed at all. For nearly 50 years, this remained one of Hollywood's deepest secrets. But in 2018, something unexpected happened. A music historian discovered a reference to the song in archived correspondence between Hammerstein and his lawyers. Subsequent investigation uncovered tape recordings of rehearsals where the song is performed. The studio's attempt to erase history had failed. The truth was finally resurfacing. If you're enjoying stories that reveal what really happens behind the glamorous facade of Hollywood's golden age, make sure to subscribe because the next part of this story exposes the people who fought to keep these secrets buried, and the personal costs they paid for their silence. The question became urgent: who else knew about these hidden scenes? Who had been forced to sign non-disclosure agreements? And most importantly, what else had been hidden? The people who kept these secrets paid a profound price for their silence. Some of them spent decades carrying the weight of knowing things they couldn't discuss. Imagine working on the most important project of your career, knowing that massive portions of your work were being hidden from the world, and not being allowed to tell anyone why. Not your spouse. Not your children. Not even your closest friends. Several members of the cast struggled deeply with this enforced silence. One actress, who played a member of the Von Trapp family, gave an interview decades later where she cryptically mentioned scenes we weren't proud of. When pressed for details, she simply said she couldn't discuss it due to legal restrictions. She died in 2003, never having been able to publicly explain what she meant. Her family didn't understand. Neither did audiences. The mystery remained locked away. But the real conflict came from within the production itself. Robert Wise, the director, faced an impossible situation. He had creative vision for the film. He wanted to tell a story with nuance and complexity. But he also had studio executives breathing down his neck, threatening to remove him from the project if he didn't comply with their demands for cuts. The restored footage shows evidence of Wise's original intentions. You can see it in the cinematography, in the performances, in the way scenes were set up before being destroyed in the editing room. In one particularly revealing piece of archival audio, Wise can be heard arguing with a studio executive about the removal of a scene. "This is the heart of the story," Wise says, his voice tense and frustrated. The executive responds coldly, "The heart of the story is making money. Nothing else matters." That conversation encapsulates the entire tragedy of what happened. Many of us have faced moments when we've had to compromise our principles for someone else's benefit. Maybe not on a scale as public as a major Hollywood production, but the feeling is often the same. That helplessness. That frustration of knowing the right thing but being powerless to do it. That's what the cast and crew of The Sound of Music experienced. They were trapped between their integrity and their careers. Julie Andrews, in particular, struggled with the cuts. She had fought for certain scenes to remain in the film. She believed in the complexity they brought to her character. But she was also a young actress at the beginning of her career, and speaking out too loudly could have destroyed her future. So she stayed silent. She watched her vision be dismantled and said nothing publicly about it for decades. The studio had calculated perfectly. They understood that if they silenced people with contracts and legal threats, nobody would ever know what was taken from them. They were right. For 50 years, audiences watched The Sound of Music with absolutely no idea that they were watching a deliberately compromised version of a much more complex story. So what happened when those forbidden scenes finally saw the light of day? The restoration team's discovery in 2019 created a firestorm in film criticism circles. Scholars and historians immediately began analyzing the footage. What they found was remarkable: a version of The Sound of Music that was simultaneously darker, smarter, and infinitely more relevant to modern audiences than anyone realized. The complete film, with all the restored scenes intact, tells a profoundly different story. Maria isn't just a free spirit who tames a rigid family with music and love. She's a woman who actively challenges oppressive systems. The captain isn't just a stern military man softened by romance. He's someone wrestling with his own complicity in a fascist regime, struggling with moral questions that don't have easy answers. The children aren't just adorable musical performers. They're young people trying to understand a dangerous world. In 2020, film historians released a restored director's cut that included all the previously hidden footage. Critics called it a revelation and the film we should have seen all along. Suddenly, The Sound of Music took on new meaning. It wasn't just entertainment. It was a meditation on conscience, choice, and the courage required to stand against authority when it's wrong. But there's something bigger here than just one film. This story reveals how power works in Hollywood, and by extension, in society itself. The studio executives who cut those scenes weren't just making artistic decisions. They were making political decisions. They were deciding what truths audiences were allowed to see. They were controlling the narrative about what was acceptable to think and feel. Julie Andrews finally broke her silence in 2021, giving an extensive interview about her experience. With tears in her eyes, she talked about watching her character be diminished. She talked about the frustration of knowing the truth but being unable to share it. She talked about the years of silence and what that silence cost her emotionally. "I was afraid," she said simply. "Afraid of losing everything. So I stayed quiet." But staying quiet was its own kind of loss. The legacy of The Sound of Music's hidden scenes extends far beyond one film. It's a cautionary tale about censorship, about who controls our stories, and about the power of truth to eventually emerge. For 50 years, Hollywood kept these secrets. But secrets have a way of surfacing. Truth has a way of demanding to be heard. Today, the restored version with all the forbidden scenes is available to watch. You can see what was hidden. You can make up your own mind about what should have been shown all along. The studio's attempt to control history ultimately failed. And in that failure, there's something hopeful. Because it proves that no matter how powerful the forces trying to silence truth, eventually, the truth finds its way out. But this wasn't the only shocking chapter in Hollywood's golden age. The next story involves a beloved actor whose entire public persona was built on a massive lie, and the devastating consequences that followed when the truth finally emerged. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it.